Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday Workshop, where we get together in the middle of the month to learn more about technology. It's March. That means we're talking about backing up. This is the World Backup Day at the end of the month, but we want you to get a head start because we never know when that data loss is going to happen. So don't wait until March 31st. Get your backup if you haven't started. Today, we're going to talk about a specific program to use to make image backups. And our presenter is one who's been with us both on the Windows side of things and Linux. Alan German is the, program chair for the Ottawa PC group, and he's volunteered today to talk to us a lot about this program that some people call EaseUS or EaseUS or whatever on doing backup. So Alan, turn things over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, John, and we'll get started. Okay, Judy gave me this title, Making a Backup Rescue Disk. That would have been a really short presentation, so I am going to talk a lot more about image systems in general. So disk imaging, as we've been talking about in the previous presentation, it's really important to do backups. And one of the things about disk images is that you can create a full backup of your entire hard drive. So you back up the operating system, the Windows or Linux or both, all of the installed applications, any configuration or customization that you've done, and in particular, all of your personal data. And that isn't going to be retrievable any other way. You can always reinstall Windows or you can reinstall Linux. You can reinstall the applications. You can change the configuration back again. But if you lose your original data, then that is not available anywhere else. So it's critical that you have, as Judy was talking about previously, it's critical that you have your personal data files available and backed up. One of the things about disk imaging is that you can create backups. You can also restore the backup, and you can restore, if you have a full backup, you can restore the entire drive, or you can select individual partitions, and we'll take a look at that briefly too. One of the neat things about image backups is that sometimes you can mount the image as a virtual disk, essentially. And then you can access that drive and restore individual files and folders basically directly from the backup image. A couple of important things. You really have to store the disk images on a separate physical hard drive. And it's pointless storing a backup on the same hard drive. If that hard drive crashes, then you lose your backup. So you must have the backup on a separate disk. And then to Judy's title here, it's also important to create a bootable version of your backup software, which comes in the form of either a rescue disk or a recovery disk, whatever they want to call it. Okay, so disk imaging. The green drive here is our hard drive in our computer. If you're a Windows user only, then what you generally see is a drive called Drive C, the Windows operating disk. But underneath that, there will be a number of hidden system partitions. So there will be a number of disk partitions on the drive, even if you only see Drive C. The full backup system basically takes everything, Windows, the applications, the data, and it creates an exact bit-for-bit copy of your hard drive on a second drive somewhere as a disk image file. So that means that you can then later on, you can use the same software to access that image and recover it back to the hard drive or to a new hard drive if your old hard drive fails, for example. I talked about disk partitions, and if you're a Linux user, then you may be in a dual boot mode. This is the way I use all my computers. And I have they originally came with Windows. I leave the Windows where it is, but then I partition the hard drive and install Linux on a second partition. So then I can boot either Windows or Linux. But I also create a third partition. And my third partition is for all my data files. And the beauty of doing that, two things really. The exact same data files can be accessed by either applications on Windows or applications on Linux. Both of those operating systems are accessing the same data partition. And then the other thing is, if I want to back up all my data files, I don't have to tell my backup system, go to this area of the drive and that area of the drive, and this folder, that folder. I just back up the entire data partition. And that makes it really easy to both back up and restore my personal data. So that's the full disk image backup. One of the things you can do, I find really useful for data in particular, is to do an incremental backup. So instead of backing up everything every time, think of it this way. The first time you make the backup, you make a master copy of the hard drive. So that becomes your full backup, the master image. The next day, the software will only back up things that have changed from the previous day. And then the day after that, day 3, again, it only backs up the things that have changed since the second day. So you end up with the master copy was your starting point. And then each day you have a smaller, typically incremental backup file, if you like, until you get to the point where you want to restore it. When you want to restore it, then you tell the backup program, okay, restore my drive to as it was on day 4. So it goes back, it grabs the master backup from day 1, it adds in the incremental backup from 2, from day 3, and from day 4, until it's restored everything up until day 4. The beauty of that is that, of course, your incremental backups are small, and so they're fast. So you don't have to spend 40 minutes backing up the whole drive. It maybe takes a couple of minutes to just do that incremental backup on any given day. And the software will take care of everything once you've set it up. All right, let's go on and talk about, I call it EaseUS Todo Backup, and in particular the free edition. I'm a real fan of free and open source software. I don't pay for any software if I don't have to, and so this free edition is a useful tool. One of the things I find is if you go and look for EaseUS Todo Backup, you'll have a hard time finding the free edition. They really want to sell you the pro version, the proprietary version, the paid version. If you in your search engine you put EaseUS Todo Backup free edition, then you're quite likely to find it directly in one of the initial links. So if you go to the website, then you get this big blue button which says free download. But notice that on the right-hand side there, just in case you don't really want the free edition, you really want to buy our wonderful software, we'll give you a 50% discount. And that's one of the things about these free editions, that they bug you all the time essentially to upgrade to the pro edition. And I'll talk about that a bit later on too. And even when you have installed the software and you want to run it, they still pop up a thing which says, hey, we'll give you 20% off right now if you just give us your credit card. However, notice at the bottom there, at the bottom of that window, that pop-up window, there's a little box which says, don't show this again. So my recommendation is to check that, and that pop-up window will go away. Okay, so now we're into the main event. We've installed the To-Do Backup program. Here is the main window, and I just want to make a full backup of my entire hard drive. So let's hit the Create Backup button here. And now we have to choose, what do we want to back up? Well, I want to back up my local disk. So I'm going to choose disk. And then it goes and finds, well, you've got this hard drive, this 250 gig solid state drive, and it's got a whole bunch of partitions. And if I check the box at the top in the red outline there, if that's checked, then all of the individual partitions on the drive are selected by default. So this is the way to make a full image backup of the entire hard drive, every partition on that drive. So let's just say OK. And now we have a target drive. So we've established the source. This is our main computer hard drive. Now we have to decide where are we going to store this backup image. And by default, it's found that, well, you have this drive D, which isn't drive C, so that must be a separate drive. And I'm going to choose a folder called My Backups. Two problems. I don't want it to be called My Backups. And secondly, D is actually a logical drive on the same solid state drive. And so I don't want to save my backup to my regular hard drive, even if it's on a separate partition. So I need to change both of those things. So let's choose that guy and decide where we actually want to store our backup image. I want to store it on a local drive. And so I can browse the list of disks here on the computer. You'll see here that I've got a Windows drive C, a data disk drive D, and here's where it wanted to put it in this My Backups, but that really is the same hard drive. So what I have to do is go down a bit further until I find this drive down here, My Passport, which is an external USB drive, which has got the drive letter P for passport. I actually have a folder already on that drive called Z Images. That's where it ends up at the bottom of the list of the folders. And you can see there I've got subfolders for an A32, which is a phone, an i7 Inspiron, which is my laptop, a T100, which is an ASUS hybrid computer, a tablet type computer. But what I want to do now is create a new folder. So I'm going to create this new folder. And I'm just going to call it EaseUS. So I know that these are my EaseUS backups. So now I can actually go and select on the Passport P drive in the Z Images folder. I can choose this EaseUS folder as my backup location. And sure enough, now if you notice up here, we've got, here's the 250 gig SSD. Here is the P drive, Z Images, and EaseUS. Everything, that's the summary, if you like, of what we're going to do. Everything's fine and dandy. So now I can just hit the backup now to actually create that image backup. And it will go through there'll be a progress bar and it'll tell me how far it's got and so forth. And eventually it will tell me that the backup was successful. Now, one of the things to note here is that in this left-hand column here, it's created this thing called disk 0, which is essentially a backup job. So now it's going to remember the source drive, the target drive, what I told it to do. So if I want to run that job again, I can just select it from this list. And we'll see how that works in just a second. Anyway, my backup's successful, so I think I can carry on. And it also pops up this window at the bottom here, tells me that the backup has actually completed. And notice that scheduling is available in this backup program. So if I wanted to, I could tell it, well, I want you to complete this backup job on the 1st of every month, let's say, and I can have that scheduled. The actual backup is on this external drive, so it's on the P drive, it's in Z Images, it's in an EaseUS directory, and it's called it disk 0. And you notice that I could have actually renamed that. I could have edited the name in my job. Disk 0 was by default. I could have, and probably should have, named that to be something a bit more meaningful. Anyway, disk 0 works. I mean, I think I know what it means. And you notice that my image is actually a file. It's a PBD file, which is the EaseUS file format for these backup images. And you notice that it's labeled it with the disk 0, so I know it belongs to this series. It's got the date that the thing was made. It says it's a full backup, and it's also version 1. So if you do this multiple times, you will end up with a series of names in this kind of format. So you know that what they are and when they were made, essentially. All right, so that's basically the process, pretty simple, of making a disk backup. You choose the source drive, you choose the target drive, and you tell it to make the backup. And we don't make backups just so we've got backups. Sometimes we have to restore them or we want to restore them. So now the question is, well, how do we actually do that? And there are a couple of ways of accessing our backups. You notice in the main window here, there is a link there, a button, Browse to Recover. So I could click on that and it would take me to a menu. Or alternatively, remember, I've got that list of backups here, the backup jobs. If I right click on that backup job, then you notice that I could down here, I could select to do another backup. But in this context menu, I've also got the option to recover an image for this series. So I can either choose the Browse to Recover up here, or I can right click on this job and choose Recover. Either way, I get to this screen, which is the first screen for the recovery process. A couple of things right here. First of all, note that by default, it's choosing to recover in disk and partition mode. So here I could choose to recover the entire drive from the image, or I could select just one or maybe two partitions to recover. Or alternatively, I could choose this button on the right-hand side, which goes into file mode, and now I can extract individual files or folders from this image. So it's quite a flexible type recovery process. Anyway, our issue is we've made a backup of the entire drive. Let's just do the simple thing and recover the entire drive. So remember, we had the choice of all kinds of different versions, dates and version numbers and that kind of thing. If we use this drop-down menu here, we could choose a particular image, and here we've chosen one from a certain date and a certain time, and it's the full image backup. Again, if this box here is checked, so all of the partitions in that image are going to be recovered. So we could go through this series of dialog boxes, and what would happen, the bottom line is that it would pop up this window which says that the target partition is occupied and cannot be deleted. And what that's trying to tell me is that, well, you're running this from a running version of Windows. And what you're trying to do is overwrite the Windows partition. And I don't like you doing that. So I'm going to prevent you from basically overwriting the running version of Windows. It basically says, go away, reboot into Windows PE, and continue recovery that way. So basically, this is why we had the initial title of making a rescue disk for EaseUS to do backup. If you want to recover a disk image of your operating system, then you really need to do it from a rescue disk, or an emergency disk, as they call it. So let's create a bootable emergency rescue disk. This is really important if your computer, if your hard drive crashes, you can't run EaseUS Todo Backup because you can't boot into Windows. So you would need a way to boot into EaseUS Todo Backup in order to recover the image which is stored on an external drive. You still need the software to be able to access and recover the disk image. And the way you do that is by using a bootable USB drive. Okay, so back to our main screen here. And let's now go up to this button up here, which is the Tools menu. One of the options on the Tools menu is to create an emergency disk. And so clearly that's what we need to do right here. And by default, it wants to create an ISO file. But I draw your attention to this little icon here, which looks like a kind of a stylized USB flash drive. Let's select that one. And in the drop-down menu here, we can choose a blank we can choose a USB drive which is plugged into our system. So in this case, it's a drive E. This is just a usual USB flash drive. So let's hit create, and it tells us that it's going to create a WinPE, which is a Windows pre-installation environment system. This is essentially a stripped down version of Windows, which is used as a boot disk. It says that this version does not support clone and system transfer. And that's okay for me because I don't want to do cloning and I don't want to do system transfers. I just want to be able to recover my disk image. But you notice that if you did want to do that, you could upgrade, guess what, to the Pro version. Send them some money and they'll be happy to help you. I'm happy just to carry on with the free version, so I'm just going to say create now, and off it goes. And there's a progress bar here which tells you how things are going. And there's some times here, spent a minute already. It's got a couple more minutes to go. So you think you've got maybe 3 minutes to wait. And after a few minutes, it says, oh, and by the way, that USB flash drive you plugged into the computer to hold the image, I'm going to reformat it. And when you do that, all of the data on that drive is going to get wiped out. So be aware that you should be using a blank USB flash drive for this process. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing anything that is on that drive. However, I want to create my USB flash drive and my rescue disk, so I have to format it. So I'm going to say OK, and off we go again. Now we've got about 5 minutes. 5 minutes have elapsed, and we've got a couple more minutes to go. It's created a WinPE ISO file. It's now exporting that file. This is the backup software, which is exporting to the flash drive, and eventually it will finish. So the WinPE ISO has been successfully exported. So we've created a bootable USB drive, which is our EaseUS Todo Backup rescue drive. And notice it took us in total about 7 minutes. So, but the good news is it's on my computer, which is probably slower than yours, and B, it's a one-time, one-off operation. So once you've done it, you don't have to do it again. So it's a fairly easy thing to do. The next weird thing is you plug in the drive and you have a look to see what you've got, and it says the folder is empty. And the first thing that came to my mind is, the backup, creating that rescue disk didn't work. So I ran it again and I had exactly the same result. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different. So clearly we should have a look at what's going on here. And it turns out that this disk really isn't empty. If we check the properties, so if you go into, you click on the right click on the disk, select properties, you find that this USB drive actually has 613 megabytes of something on on the drive system itself. And if I look with the utility program, this is called tree size free. It basically tells you how much space various files and folders are taking on any given drive. And it looks at, it also shows you the hidden system files. And that's what the problem is here with the flash drive. File Explorer is showing us the files which are in the clear, but these files are system files which are hidden by default. So you'd have to use a setting in File Explorer to be able to see these. This tree size free shows them anyway. So you can see that there's all kinds of files and folders, boot files and all kinds of other things here. And that's my 612 or so megabytes. So I've created a bootable rescue disk. So now we boot into this disk. We found that it's not an empty drive after all. We need to boot the computer from the USB flash drive. And typically that's, you have to figure out how to do that for your particular computer. On my system, I plug the USB flash drive into a port. I turn on the computer. I hit the F12 key a number of times, and it will pop up a boot menu. And from that boot menu, I can select boot from the USB flash drive. It boots directly into the, it's running Windows PE, this stripped down version of Windows, but the computer boots directly into the backup software. So when you run the flash drive, you boot the flash drive, then you get the same kind of screen that you would see on if you were running this from the hard drive. So we do the same kind of thing. Now we're running from the USB flash drive, but we want to restore the disk image. And essentially, it's the reverse of what we did previously. So let's do the browse to recover. And we need to select the location where the backup file, the PVD file, is stored. So it wants a source. The source in my case is going to be a local drive. It's going to be my passport drive, that drive P. Remember, it was Z images and EaseUS. And disk 0, if you remember, was the backup image that we made. And underneath that is that file with the date, the full backup, version 1, excuse me, and it's a PBD file. So we can say, okay, let's use that one. And again, by default, we've chosen all of the partitions in that image to be restored. We can just say next. And now it wants to know, well, where do you want to recover this disk image to? What's the target drive for this image recovery? Well, I want it to go to my 250 gig solid state drive, which is where it came from in the first place. I'm going to restore my disk image to my original hard drive. And again, I'm going to choose all of the partitions to be restored. And this time it warns me, hey, you do know that you're going to overwrite the system partition on this drive. Well, yes, of course I do, because that's what I'm trying to do. I've got a problem here somewhere, and I'm trying to restore an image to make the hard drive the way it was when I made the image. I want to take it back in time to that point when I made the backup image. So if I agree to that, then it gives me a summary. It tells me, oh, look, this is what your backup image looks like, and this is what your hard drive is going to look like once I make the copy. And you can see that you've basically got a one-to-one type association between the various partitions. This is a GPT partition scheme. It's got lots of system recovery type partitions on it. And it's got a Windows partition right here, which is going to copy down to this Windows partition here. Don't worry the fact that this is drive C and this is going to be drive D, because that will all get sorted out in the wash when we actually do when we do the recovery and we reboot the system. So let's just tell it to proceed with this recovery process. And eventually it will tell us it's finished successfully. It'll give us some kind of time. And in my case, it took about an hour to do that. But once I reboot the computer, then the system, everything's been restored. The operating system, all of the installed applications, and all of my data files have been restored. And remember, they've been restored to the point in time when I made that full disk image backup. So when you're making disk images, you need to make them relatively frequently, or do some different things with data files to make sure everything is up to date. Typically, I do a full system backup every month because the operating system, Windows, you have Patch Tuesday once a month, and that generally means that things in the operating system have changed. I don't update applications all that often, so those don't change very rapidly. My data files change all the time, but I back those up separately in addition to this main backup. So I can basically restore my backup image. I can do a system update to bring everything up to date in terms of Windows patches. And then I can load my latest version of my data backup and have everything back up and running in fairly short order. So that's basically pretty simple backup and recovery. Now, one of the things is, how do we know that if we make a disk image backup, how do we know that backup's going to work when we need it? And you really don't want to wait until you absolutely need it to find out whether it works or not, because if you don't have a good backup, then it's basically going to be too late. So you really need to make sure that you can A, access the backup image files to start with, and B, that the backup image has got the right kind of stuff on it. So how would you do that? Well, no problem. You just blow away your entire fully functional version of Windows that you're using right this minute, reformat the hard drive, get rid of everything, and recover the disk image. And that will tell you whether your disk image works or not. Okay, that really isn't a very good idea. There has to be a better way than that. And one of the ways to do it, which I'd suggest, is instead just recover the backup image to a portable USB drive and then see what you've got. I actually don't do this very often because I've been using Linux for about 20 years. And in the good old days, some of the Linux distros weren't terribly stable. I'd be playing around with them. I'd change configurations. I'd install things. And things wouldn't work. And eventually, Linux wouldn't boot anymore. I got really good at recovering Linux partitions. And I'm pretty confident that when I make backup images, I know that they're going to work. But if you've never done it, I really don't recommend making your computer not be able to boot and then see if you can reboot from a backup image. So this is one way to do it. There are some other ways too. EaseUS Todo Backup, for example, has a verification option. If you go to Tools and check Image, then it will look at the backup. It will confirm that it can see the backup, and it will also check the integrity of the files in that backup. You could also do that thing where you can mount the image as a virtual drive. And again, in the Tools menu, you've got this Mount Backup option. Once you've got the virtual drive, then you can look at the files and folders inside the actual image and see if they're A, available, and B, if you can read them and they're what you expect them to be. But that third option is what we're going to take a look at right now. Restore the image to a spare external USB drive. So here I've got a USB portable drive plugged into my laptop. So the external drive has to be at least the same size or larger than the source drive. And remember that the images typically are compressed, so it's the original size of the drive that you're interested in. I'm using a 1 terabyte portable drive with a 250 gig SSD, so my target is a lot bigger than my original source. That's not going to be a problem. One of the things I found with EaseUS was if I didn't blank out the drive so that it was all unallocated space, it couldn't actually see the disk drive when I tried to do the locate the backup image. That drive wasn't listed, or rather, when I tried to recover it, I couldn't tell it to go to the target drive, the external USB drive, because it wasn't listed. If I make it unallocated space, then it showed up in the list, so that was okay. And then what I do is I choose the USB drive to be the target for the recovery. Once I've done that, I can check the files and folders in the windows and my data partition on the actual recovered drive, and that will tell me A, I can access the backup images where I stored them, and B, I can recover them and they will recover successfully. So if you remember, we can just tell it to recover a drive. We can choose the hard drive, this image again. We've chosen this image. We're going to take all of the partitions on that image and try to recover them. But this time, instead of recovering to hard disk 0, the original 250 gig solid state drive, let's scroll down here until we hit this hard disk number 3, which is the external USB drive. So this is what I was saying earlier. If I didn't have this as unallocated, this disk wasn't showing up in this list. So that's why I had to make it into all unallocated space. Right, so we're going to recover that disk image to this external USB drive. Again, we're going to get this layout. This is what it looks like, and it's going to go down here. But notice one of the odd things here. By default, it chooses to auto-fit the disk. And what it does is it takes my 140 gig Windows partition and basically fills up all of the kind of available space other than the system partitions. And it's going to expand my Windows drive up to 760 gigabytes. Well, rather than do that, let's drop down this menu here and change it to copy as the source. So now it's just taking my 140 gig Windows drive and going to recover it as a 140 gig Windows drive and leave some unallocated space on the external USB. So again, it's going to, it'll finish, recovery is completed. Now, this is what my laptop looks like without the external USB plugged in. And you notice that I've got a Windows drive, which is drive C. I've got a data disk, which is drive D. And there's a couple of USB drives plugged in at the same time. There's actually also a Linux partition on there, but of course Windows doesn't acknowledge that Linux partitions actually exist. So it just shows me drive C and drive D and these extra USB drives. If I plug in the external USB that's got the recovered drives on it, then you can see I get a whole bunch more stuff. And the important ones are right here. You notice that it tells me that I have a diagnostic partition, which is decided is going to be drive A. I've got a recovered Windows 10 partition, which is decided is going to be drive B. And I've got a recovered data partition, which is decided is going to be drive F. Kind of interesting that we have drives A and B. In the good old days, of course, these were reserved drive letters for floppy disk drives. But since really nobody has those installed from new anymore, drive A and drive B are now perfectly fine to use as drive letters on a modern Windows system. And EaseUS here decided it was going to use them. if I actually look at the hard drive, that external hard drive, drive number 3, in disk management, you'll see that it's actually disk 2 here because the main hard drive is disk 0. But you'll notice that in addition to the Windows drive and the data drive, there's all kinds of system partitions here. And over here over here is a 62 gig hard drive partition rather, and that is my Linux partition, which Windows didn't tell me about. So all of those system partitions, the main partitions, everything has been restored to this external USB drive. So if we now look at the recovered Windows drive, remember that was drive B on my laptop. You can see there's all kinds of stuff here, but down the bottom you see some obvious Windows folders here. There's a program files folder, there's a program files x86 folder. So that kind of tells you that this is indeed a Windows partition drive C, as it would normally be on as an installed disk drive. Here is my recovered data drive. You won't recognize any of those, but I recognize that instantly as, yes, that is indeed the file and folder structure on my regular dedicated data partition. And if I want to, let's go down here and look at this this Python script file. Let's right-click on him and decide to edit that file with Notepad++, and that tells us that yes, here is all the Python code in that file. So those kind of things tell me that I've successfully been able to access my backup file. I've been able to restore the disk partitions, and I can access the files and folders on those partitions. So this kind of trick of temporarily, if you like, restoring a disk image file to an external hard drive gives you the opportunity to test that your images are actually good and are working. Now, I'd said earlier that I actually have a backup process. I actually don't use EaseUS to do backup anymore. I got tired of those pop-ups asking me to update to the pro version. So I went looking for an open source solution, and I came across this program called Foxclone. And I basically use Foxclone to make a full disk image backup every month. And Foxclone is interesting because it's not an installable program. You actually run it as a bootable USB drive. It runs on the Linux, and so essentially it serves the process of being its own rescue disk, if you like, because it's a bootable USB drive to start with. So in addition to the full monthly backup, I do a daily incremental backup of that dedicated data partition. Right? Remember, my operating system and my installed applications don't change very frequently, but my data files change almost daily. So I have this incremental backup program called Back in Time, which does a backup every day. Every time I log on, in fact, into my Linux system, it backs up the data directory. And then I also use a USB flash drive, and every time I complete a session on my computer, I plug in the flash drive and I run Free File Sync, which is a file and folder synchronization program, and I synchronize my data drive to the flash drive and keep everything in sync. So if I ever have a problem, I can restore the most recent monthly full disk image backup. I can run the system update process to update the operating system, and then I reload I run Free File Sync again and synchronize the current version of my data files to the recovered version and bring the recovered version up to date in terms of all my data files. And I just remind you down the bottom here that my data drive, it's the same drive for both Windows, where it shows up as drive D, and it's the same drive for Linux, where it shows up as a media data disk mount point. Okay, Foxclone is just a couple of things about Foxclone I really like. It's a live USB, as I said. It's a GUI type program, and it does backup and restore and all those other good things. And one of the things it doesn't do is it doesn't work for RAID systems. So if you're using RAID, then Foxclone isn't for you. But if you just have a regular disk-based system, then it works just fine, and it's happy to process both Windows and Linux operating system files. One of the downsides is that it doesn't currently, this is a program which is under development, hasn't been changed for a while though, but at the moment there's no facility to mount the image and browse the files and folder in the image. You have to actually restore a partition or restore the whole disk to actually see the files. Anybody who uses Linux, this is what a Ubuntu desktop looks like. And you can see here we've got the Foxclone backup program available, so we can just double click on that. And it's a really simple user interface. The top two boxes here let us choose the source drive. So what drive do you want to back up? I want to back up my 250 gig solid state drive. By default, all the partitions are checked. I can uncheck these if I don't want to do everything. But typically I just check everything. And then I have to go down here and choose, well, I want my destination drive to be an external USB drive. Just note here, there's a bug in the system. My external drive is not 32 terabytes. It's actually 4 terabytes. So I don't know where they're getting 32 from, but I choose the external drive, and now I can go down to a my book Z images Foxclone directory, and by default it chooses today's date essentially, and a .backup type extension. Just let it run, and it will create the backup. The backup actually is a multiple files. Every partition on the drive has a pair of backup image files. There's an image file which is compressed using gzip, and there's a log file which is the information that goes along with the partition number 1, which tells it all about the files and folder structure on that system. And then there are pairs for other partitions as well. Another thing, if you want to deal with individual partitions rather than the entire drive, then you need to go to settings and choose this link down here, this button down here, enable, let's go back one, enable the partition selection. And if we check that, then we can back up individual partitions, or we can restore individual partitions. So it's a really simple program for backup and restoration. I really like it. Okay, and as was said earlier, March 31st is World Backup Day. So I think between Judy and I, you have all the reasons why you should back up, and you have at least one tool which tells you, a couple of tools actually, which will enable you to back up your entire system and recover things pretty easily. So that's the end of the prepared presentation. Anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Excellent as usual. And that's perfectly what we wanted to see, is specifically how to use the programs And I will have to admit, Alan, because of you, I have made my first image backup using Foxclone. I don't usually make image backups, but for next week's presentation, I included that. So thank you for introducing me to Foxclone. Judy is compiling. She had me close the chat box because she was getting so many questions. So have a drink of water, Alan, because you're going to be talking to Gib.
Yeah, sorry. You forgot to tell me to unmute myself.
Oh, I never tell you that.
The presenter know if the image created is compressed so that a smaller drive can be used than the original files occupy?
The image is compressed, but you can't restore an image to a smaller drive because it gets uncompressed when you do the restoration.
Thank you. The bootable emergency USB drive needs to be how many gigabytes to safely cover the procedure?
For EaseUS, it's less than 1 gigabyte.
Okay.
And you'll be lucky these days to be able to find a drive which is 1 gigabyte. But it's the USB drive only stores the software. It's got nothing to do with where you store the actual image. That needs to be a completely different drive altogether.
Okay. This is from Marianne. She says, I have a new laptop with only a C drive. How do I know what size USB to use? I have not created partitions.
Right click on the C drive on the Windows File Explorer, look at Properties, and it will tell you how big your drive is.
Okay. From Dennis. Once I create the bootable rescue disk and I may to use it in the future, then must I now permanently change the BIOS boot menu on my computer so that it will try to boot from USB drive first? Or when I need to use the rescue disk, can I just try to get into boot menu as my computer is starting up and so somehow tell it to boot from USB drive right now?
That really depends on the actual computer. Some of my computers, I have a keystroke that will give me a boot menu, and I can just select the USB when I need it. Another of my computers, I actually have to go into the BIOS first, change the boot order so it boots from the USB drive, do the recovery, and then go back to the BIOS and change it back to boot from the main hard drive. It really depends on the manufacturer how they allow you to boot from the USB drive. And Mr. Google, he knows everything. He'll tell you how to do that.
Michael says, can you omit folders? For example, I may not want to back up my data since I have made copies more regularly on another external drive.
That's not very practical for disk imaging. Disk imaging, most of the disk imaging, the ones I do anyway, are the entire drive or just partitions. Now, EaseUS To Do will actually let you back up files and folders. And I imagine you can select which ones you want, but I've never actually done that.
Okay. 3 from Steve. Do you back up your emergency disk?
No, I don't, because I could always make another one.
Do you need to turn off secure boot to boot from the emergency disk?
I don't know, because I turned off secure boot a long time ago and I never turned it back on again.
Is back in time better than file history?
Well, it's different. And back in time is a Linux program. Back in file history is a Windows program. I think basically they do the same thing, but I mean, clearly it depends which operating system you're on.
Do you know if the image created is compressed so that a smaller, never mind, I asked you that one, that's in there twice. Dennis asks, Windows data files and Linux data files are different. So how does it work when you have the third partition of data on your backup drive?
The files aren't different. It's the file system which can be different. So, for example, Windows typically uses NTFS. Linux typically uses ext4. But if you create a dedicated data partition and you make it NTFS, Windows can read that. But Linux can also read it because you can tell it in the file system table that disk is formatted as NTFS, and then there's a driver which will read those files. So I can use exactly the same files on an NTFS data partition in either Windows or Linux.
Okay. Second part. How can you mix Windows and Linux data files into one partition and then get them back if needed to restore? I'm kind of confused on how this works.
It's one partition and exactly the same files which are used by both operating systems.
Alan, another way to say it is that a file is a file types. Linux uses the same file types as Windows uses, so the files are exactly the same. Again, it's the system that it sits on. So I can open up a file in Windows Word, and I can open up the same file in LibreOffice Writer. I used to do that all the time, going back and forth between school. So it's not the file types, because those are universal, that you can restore back.
Right, and that's for data files, of course, too. We're talking about like doc files. What you can't do is you can't run Windows exe files on Linux directly. You can use the data files, but you can't necessarily use the applications.
Christopher would like to know if it's necessary to create a new emergency disk for each image backup.
No, one emergency drive fits all.
Okay. Dennis says, let me see. Dennis is over here. Windows data. Once I create the bootable rescue disk and I made to use it in the future. Hold on. No, that isn't it. Let me start over. Once I create the bootable rescue disk and I may need to use it in the future, then must now I permanently change the BIOS boot menu on my computer so that it will try to boot from the USB drive first? Or when I need to use the rescue disk, can I just try to get the boot menu as my computer is starting up and somehow say boot from the USB drive right now?
Yeah, we talked about that before.
We talked about that.
Manufacturer dependent.
Okay. SIG says, said the free version doesn't support clone or system transfer. What's the difference between restoring to a fresh disk and system transfer? More specifically, what is system transfer?
No idea, because I've never done
it. Okay. It must have been on one of the slides.
I think it probably means that you can transfer the Windows operating system from one drive to another. Now, why you'd want to do that, I have no idea. You could just reinstall Windows, but.
Okay. Anne Marie wants to know if when she does a full system backup of a Windows 10 computer, then goes out and buys a Windows 11, does it wipe out the Windows 11 operating system when I do the full system restore? And what is a simple way to get around that?
Don't do it. If you just bought yourself a brand new Windows 11 computer, you don't want to overwrite Windows 11 with Windows 10.
Yeah, hey, Anne Marie, you just want to add your data. Easy peasy, okay? Stephanie, you're on. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, I clicked on something else. Okay. The I have used the D drive for a long time, but I find that some things seem to automatically like to put things on the C drive that really is data, making your things work and things like that. Uh, I don't know what the solution of that is other than, going after everything.
Sometimes you can tell applications where you want to store data, or otherwise you just do a file save as, and then select where you want it to go.
Yeah, I think I have to go back and try to make sure that I put as many things over there as possible, but I don't want to lose something just because it's in the wrong drive.
I mean, for example, in LibreOffice, you can tell it what your preferred path is for saving files. But in other programs, you might have to do a file save as and then tell it you want it to go to drive D rather than where it wants to put it.
Yeah, I find that I have things that are in downloads which are under my name going up through a bunch of, things going that. And then there are some that are there otherwise. And they seem to be the same place, but they seem to be in more places also. I don't understand that. The other question had to do is I have two programs that I use with almost constantly changes, and they are very large files. One is Quicken, which I've had for many, many years, and the other is my emails coming in and out on Microsoft. So, I think I need to make some more archive files, but other than that, I don't know will they really, if I do a daily change, is it going to be an awful lot of stuff up there?
Depends how the system's structured, I guess. If it's just one file and it's huge, and it changes, then you'll have to copy a huge file. But if it's done in bits and pieces, then it will only store the bits that are new.
Thank you.
Steve.
Yeah, if your system went down, first thing you would think of is use your emergency disk to boot up to restore an image to make that bootable. Well, what if your emergency disk isn't bootable anymore? How do you make another emergency disk?
I go to my second computer and make another emergency disk.
Yeah, that's just well, what I realized that, yeah, if that happened and I've got another computer, I better make sure I've got a backup of that emergency disk too, just in case that one, and I've actually had that happen once.
Well, you can also knock on the next door and ask if you can borrow a cup of sugar and also make an emergency disk on the guy's computer.
I was going to say you go over to Alan's house and get it done, and Cal says make 3.
Yeah. Well, and thumb drives are cheap enough that you can, make a couple if you needed to.
Well, like I said, Cal says make 3. Maybe he'll loan you one.
Yeah, you can never have enough backups.
That's true. Sol, you're on.
So Alan,
Well,
go ahead. Oh,
I was just going to say to make if you have emergency problem, you go to your computer club and they probably got emergency recovery disks for all those things. And the email question, if you have Thunderbird, each folder is in a separate file. If you have Outlook, it's all in one humongous file, which is one of the reasons why I prefer Thunderbird, because you can archive stuff in a separate folder and it doesn't have to be backed up every time if you're doing incremental backups. And Quicken is one of those things that every time I change it, I make a separate backup of that file on other media, which is dated. And, if it's a really important thing like that, you back it up every time you change it. There was a question back there about what was the difference between disk transfer and cloning versus backup and restore. Well, the times you want to use that is if your hard drive is going bad and you need to somehow save stuff off from it, or you're just updating your hard drive and want to transfer all the data to your new hard drive and then use it to replace the physical hard drive in your computer. If you just have a backup restore program, you have to back up on a separate media and then do a restore from that to the new drive, which is actually a good idea because then you also have a backup too. But if you're trying to do it the fastest way possible, it's faster if you can just immediately transfer from one drive to another. But you can certainly survive without that feature if it's only available from a paid version.
Joe, do you know what they mean by system transfer?
I'm not sure just what they mean by that. That is a little ambiguous. And that also brings up another thing. If you have an image copy, make them reflect and also EaseUS To Do both allow you to mount your backup copy and restore specific folders. So if you just want to do your data transfer to a different operating system, that's one of the ways you can do it using your external image backup. You don't have to make a separate backup just to get that stuff. Yeah, if they're transferring to a different version of an operating system, that requires some specialized programs to do that. And there may be some that claim to do that.
Saul, let's try again.
Okay, Alan, I know you said you no longer use EaseUS for your backup because you changed to Foxclone, but you mentioned in the presentation under testing, one method was that it has a tools utility and to check the image. Do you think all that does is when it creates the image, it creates a hash sum for that image to see if the integrity hasn't changed?
I'm sure it's something like that, so yes.
Okay, it's not actually doing a bit for bit verification from source to destination at any given time.
I would doubt that very much.
Okay, thank you.
And Jay,
Thank you. A quick question. Since this is a Chinese company, is there any concern?
I don't know. Buyer beware, I guess. It gets good reviews. I've not heard anything bad about it. But as I say, I don't use it, so I shouldn't say.
Thank you.
Joel,
If you're paranoid, yes. If you work for the NSA, probably yes. For most of us, probably no. There are enough people using that backup that somebody is probably looking to see whether it does anything nefarious. And if it is, it'll eventually be found and it'll ruin the company. So I think the average person doesn't really need to worry about that.
and it's been around for 1,000 years. Leo, ask Leo if you are familiar with his column. He has written a book about it. And I don't think he would if there was anything wrong with it in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you.
John Kramer, I love your shirt. Absolutely. You could be hanging on my front door with my shamrock out there. Anyway, are there any more questions going, gone? If not, thank you, Alan, for an absolutely outstanding, way over my head presentation. I appreciate that. So we had one for the beginners and one for the advanced people. That's way cool.
Let's say intermediate people.
Intermediate people. Okay, intermediate. Oh God, I'm not even up to intermediate. Oh Lord.
Oh, you could be. Alan did a good job because the idea of being able to just GUI do it made it real easy. So, Alan, I want to thank you again. Both you and Judy, this was a great start for our annual March backup month. Like I said, we probably could fit in one or two more workshops because there's so much to talk about in backup. But hopefully this gives you a start. If you weren't a backup person, Judy's presentation should give you the information that you need to get busy. And if you want to get an image backup, then Alan showed you that 2 different programs, both the EaseUS and the Fox clone, are ways to do it. And then later in the month, the end of the month, as Judy says, we'll have a couple of more presentations on specific software.